Welcome to Brainish English Stories.
Olenka, the daughter of a retired man, sat on the back steps of her house doing nothing. It was hot and flies were bothering her. Dark clouds were coming in the sky, and it felt good to think the evening would be cooler. Kukin, who lived in the same house, stood in the yard, looking up at the sky. He was the manager of an open-air theater. "Rain again," he said sadly. "Every day it rains. It's ruining me. I'm losing money every day. The public doesn't care. They only want silly shows. And I still have to pay rent and the actors." Olenka listened to Kukin seriously. She felt sad for him and fell in love with him. He was a thin man with a sad face, but Olenka cared for him deeply. Olenka always needed to love someone. She loved her sick father, her aunt, and even her teacher. She was kind and gentle with a soft smile. Everyone liked her. Her house was near the theater, and she could hear the music every night. It felt like Kukin was fighting the world, and she wanted to help him. When Kukin came home late, she would smile at him through the window. Kukin asked her to marry him, and they were happy together. But it rained even on their wedding day, and Kukin still looked sad. They worked well together. Olenka helped with the theater, taking care of the money and paying the actors. She told everyone that the theater was the most important thing in the world, just like Kukin always said. "But do you think people care?" Olenka asked. "They just want the circus." Yesterday, the Nitschka and I showed Faust burlesqued, but the seats were almost empty. If we had shown something silly, the theater would be full. Tomorrow we will show Orpheus and Hades. Please come. Olenka repeated whatever Kukin said about the theater and the actors. She spoke like him, saying the public didn't care about good art. She helped with the shows, corrected the actors, and even argued with the local newspaper when they gave a bad review. The actors liked her and called her the darling. She felt sorry for them and lent them money. If they didn't pay her back, she didn't tell Kukin. She only cried a little. In the winter, they were still happy together. They rented a theater in town and let other groups use it. Olenka became fuller and looked very happy, but Kukin got thinner and complained about losing money, even though he did okay that winter. At night, he coughed and Olenka took care of him, giving him syrup and wrapping him up in warm blankets. "You are my sweet," she said, stroking his hair. "You're so dear." During Lent, Kukin went to Moscow for work and Olenka couldn't sleep without him. She sat by the window, looking at the stars and feeling lonely, like a hen without its rooster. Kukin was delayed in Moscow, and one night there was a knock on the gate. It was a telegram. Olenka opened it with shaking hands and read that Kukin had died suddenly. Olenka cried, "My dearest, why did I meet you and love you? Who will take care of me now?" Kukin was buried in Moscow. Olenka came home, and as soon as she entered her house, she cried so loudly that people in the street could hear her. "Poor Olenka," the neighbors said. "She is so sad." 3 months later, Olenka came home from church, still feeling very sad. Walking next to her was Vasily Pustovalov, the manager of a lumber yard. He wore a straw hat and a white vest, looking more like a landowner than a businessman. "Everything happens for a reason, Olga Semyonovna," he said kindly. "If someone close to us dies, it's God's will, and we should accept it." He walked her to her gate, said goodbye, and left. Olenka couldn't stop thinking about him. Soon after, an older woman visited Olenka for coffee and talked about how good and steady Pustovalov was, and how any woman would be lucky to marry him. A few days later, Pustovalov visited Olenka, and even though he stayed for only 10 minutes, Olenka fell deeply in love with him. They got engaged, and shortly after, they were married. Olenka and Pustovalov were happy together. He worked at the lumber yard, and Olenka helped him with the bookkeeping and orders when he was away. "Lumber prices go up every year," she would tell people. "We used to get wood from nearby, but now Vasily has to travel far to get it." She felt like she had always been in the lumber business. She loved talking about beams, planks, and wood. At night, she even dreamed about piles of lumber and wagons full of wood. Olenka agreed with everything her husband said. If he thought the weather was too hot, she did too. If he thought business was slow, she felt the same. They never went out to the theater or the circus because Pustovalov didn't like it and Olenka didn't either. On Saturdays, they went to church together, and on holidays, they went to early mass. Afterward, they would walk home, drink tea, and enjoy a nice meal together. The house always smelled of delicious food, like soup or roast meat. Every week, they went to the baths and came home with red faces, happy and relaxed. "We are doing well, thank God," Olenka told her friends. "I hope everyone can be as happy as Vasily and I." When her husband, Pustovalov, went to buy wood, Olenka missed him a lot. She couldn't sleep and often cried. Sometimes Smirnov, a veterinary doctor who lived in her house, visited her. He told her stories or they played cards. He shared how his wife had cheated on him and now he sent money only for their son. "You should forgive your wife, if not for her, then for your son's sake," Olenka would say as he left. When Pustovalov returned, Olenka told him about Smirnov's troubles, and they both felt sorry for the child. Then, they prayed to God to send them children of their own. For 6 years, Olenka and Pustovalov lived happily. But one winter, after drinking hot tea, Pustovalov went outside without a hat and caught a cold. His illness lasted 4 months, and then he passed away. Olenka was left alone again. "Why did you leave me?" she cried after his funeral. "How will I live without you?" She wore black clothes, didn't go out much, and only left the house to go to church or visit her husband's grave. It was almost like she lived the life of a nun. After 6 months, Olenka started to go out more. She was often seen drinking tea with Smirnov in her garden. She repeated his opinions about how the town needed better veterinary care. Olenka always adopted the views of those she loved. She couldn't live without feeling close to someone. Now, she found comfort with Smirnov, even though they tried to keep their relationship secret. But it was clear to everyone. When Smirnov's friends visited, Olenka served tea and joined their conversations about animal health. One day, after his friends left, Smirnov got angry and told her, Please don't talk about things you don't understand. It's embarrassing. She looked at him, shocked, and asked, "But what should I talk about, Volodika?" Olenka hugged Smirnov, tears in her eyes, and asked him not to be angry. They were happy, but not for long. Smirnov soon left with his regiment, moving far away, almost to Siberia. Olenka was left completely alone. Her father had died long ago, and she had no one. She became thin and looked sad. People who once smiled at her no longer noticed her. In the evenings, she would sit outside and listen to the music from far away, but it didn't make her happy anymore. She felt empty and had nothing to say. She didn't even have opinions about anything anymore. She used to always have thoughts to share when she was with Kukin, Pustovalov, or Smirnov, but now there was only silence inside her. Time passed, and the town around her changed. New streets and houses were built, but her house became old and broken. Olenka grew older and sadder. She would sit on the steps, feeling lonely. Sometimes memories would make her cry, but the emptiness always returned. One day in July, while sitting outside, she heard a knock at the gate. She opened it and saw Smirnov. He had grown older and had gray hair. Olenka burst into tears and hugged him. She didn't even remember how they walked inside and sat down to drink tea. "My dear Vladimir, where have you come from?" Olenka asked, shaking with happiness. "I've come to stay," Smirnov said. "I've left the army and want to settle here. My son needs to go to school, and my wife and I are together again." "Where is she?" Olenka asked. "At the hotel with our son. I'm looking for a place to stay." Olenka was very happy and said, "Please take my house. You can live here, and I won't charge you rent." She started to cry with joy. The next day, she was busy painting and cleaning her house. Her old smile returned, and she felt alive again. Soon, Smirnov's wife and son arrived. His wife was thin and serious, while the boy, Sasha, was small but cheerful with blue eyes and dimples. He ran to play with Olenka's kitten and laughed happily. "Is that your cat, Auntie?" he asked. "Can I have a kitten when she has babies? My mom is scared of mice." Olenka chatted with him and felt a warm happiness in her heart, as if he were her own son. That evening, while Sasha studied his lessons, Olenka watched him and said softly, "You are so clever and cute." Sasha recited, "An island is a tract of land entirely surrounded by water." Olenka smiled and repeated, "An island is a tract of land," feeling good to have her thoughts again after so long. At dinner, she talked with Sasha's parents about school. She said how hard studies had become, but that a classical education was good for future jobs, like becoming a doctor or engineer. Sasha started school, but his mother went to visit her sister and didn't return. His father was often away inspecting cattle, leaving Sasha feeling alone and hungry. So, Olenka moved him into her wing and made a small room for him. Every morning, Olenka would come into his room and see him sleeping peacefully, thinking it was a shame to wake him. "Sashenka," she said gently, "get up, darling. It's time for school." He woke up, got dressed, and prayed before having tea and breakfast. He was a bit grumpy from sleep. You need to study your fable better, Sashenka, she reminded him, worried. Please try hard and listen to your teachers. Oh, let me be, Sasha said. Then he left for school, wearing a big cap and carrying his satchel. Olenka followed him quietly. Sashenka, she called out. Sasha turned around, and Olenka quickly gave him a date candy. When he reached the school, he said, "Embarrassed, you should go home, Aunt. I can walk the rest myself." Olenka watched him until he went inside the school. Oh, how she loved him. She had never felt such deep love before. For this boy, with dimples in his cheeks and a big cap, she would have given her life joyfully. After saying goodbye, she walked home happily, feeling full of love. Her face, which had become younger in the past months, shone brightly. People smiled at her as they passed by. "How are you, Olga Semyonovna?" they asked. "The gymnasium is very hard now," she told someone at the market. Yesterday, the first class had a fable to memorize, a Latin translation, and a math problem. How can a little boy do all that? She repeated what Sasha had said about his lessons and teacher. At 3 o'clock, they had dinner together. In the evening, they studied, and Olenka cried with him over the hard work. She spent a long time saying a prayer over him before he went to sleep. As she lay in bed, she dreamed of Sasha finishing school, becoming a doctor or an engineer, having a big house, and starting a family. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she thought about it, while her black cat purred beside her. Suddenly, there was a loud knock at the gate. Olenka woke up scared, her heart racing. She thought, a telegram from Kharkov. His mother wants him to come. She felt very sad and cold. But soon she heard voices. It was the veterinarian coming home. Thank God, she thought, feeling relieved. She returned to bed, thinking of Sasha, who was asleep in the next room, sometimes mumbling in his sleep, "I'll give it to you." Get away. Quit your scrapping.